Okay, today we're going to try to squeeze out a couple more chapters of Luke. I actually am still here in my apartment today. I thought I would be gone by this point, but I'm not. I will be leaving later today. So I'm not going to be able to finish the Gospel of Luke, but I am going to try to get another couple of chapters done. Yesterday we got up to the point where he was arriving in Jerusalem, near the end of chapter 19. We will continue from there. Now, most of this, in fact, just about all of this, that we're going to be reading today was also included in Matthew and or Mark. Luke will have a few unique things to say about some of this stuff, and we will point that out as we go, but most of this is repeated material. And honestly, as I've said before, for the most part, I like the way it's worded in the other Gospels more than the way it's worded in Luke. So we're going to read a lot of this without too much commentary, because we've already commented on almost all of this stuff. But there are a few tidbits and insights that Luke will provide, the others do not. And so we will mention those as we go, and some other things. But we're going to try to get through these next couple of chapters pretty efficiently. Starting in chapter 19, verse 45. Then he entered the temple area, so he's just arrived in the city, and began driving out those who were selling. Now we know that this actually happened the next day. He arrived late in the evening, apparently, on one day, I guess Sunday night, and then Monday morning he came back to the town and did this. And then, at any rate, and began driving out those who were selling. It is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it, because all the people hung on his words. They thought he was a prophet. They thought he might be the Messiah. They wanted to know. One day, as he was, remember, Luke wasn't present for any of this. Matthew was present for, because he was one of the apostles. Mark may have been present too. It's very possible, in fact, I think very likely, that Mark had first-hand experience of these events because he was in Jerusalem at that time. And as I said before, the Last Supper may very well have been in Mark's house. But Luke was not present for any of this, so he's not explaining this in terms of the days and the progression of the week. He's just saying every day he was there, one of these days this happened. As he was teaching the people in the temple courts and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, together with the elders, came up to him. Tell us by what authority you are doing these things, they said. Who gave you this authority? And this is a direct reference to his cleansing of the temple. They wanted to know where he got the business, his drive to do that. The timeline for these events, as we found from the other Gospels, was he arrived late on Sunday, came into the city, looked around, didn't do anything. Just looked around, presumably making up his mind of what he was going to do the next day. Monday, he cursed the fig tree on the way into this town, drove out the temple, and apparently he spent the rest of the day on Monday teaching. Then he went back to Bethany. We know that he's spending his nights at Martha and Mary and Lazarus' house. We know that from John. And then Tuesday he went back to the city again. This time they found that the fig tree he had cursed the day before was withered from the root. And then they have this confrontation, and then Tuesday is all about confronting the Pharisees. Apparently they didn't confront him on Monday. Apparently that first day, after he drove the money changers away and all that, they took a day to regroup, and then they came back at him on Tuesday, the following day. And they want to know by what authority he's doing these things, because he is directly challenging their authority and asserting his own authority. So where does that authority come? And it's one thing if he has the authority to do it, which, I believe he did, but they don't believe that, so they wanted to know, where's their authority coming from? Why do you think you have the authority to do this? So here's the thing. I will also ask you a question. Tell me. And we know also that he was going to make this if you don't answer my question, I won't answer yours sort of thing. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? They discussed it amongst themselves and said, if we say from heaven, which it was, that's the correct answer, he will ask, why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, because they are persuaded that John was a prophet. Apparently the Pharisees were not persuaded of that, but the people were. So they answered, we don't know where it came from. Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. Jesus' authority came from the same place John's authority did, from heaven. They spoke the same message, the difference being that John was speaking about Jesus, and Jesus was speaking about himself, but the message they spoke was the same, about the coming of the kingdom, the need to repent. And they both got their authority from the same place. So if they did not accept John's message, they're not going to accept Jesus's. He went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it out to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat the servant and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. This is the heir, they said. Let's kill him, and then the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Now, in the other Gospels, this is recorded as a conversation between Jesus and the crowd. In this case, Jesus is saying it all himself, and the people have something else to say instead. When the people heard this, they said, may this never be! Now, again, this is an interesting detail in John, or Luke, I should say, because the others don't put it this way. The others record as a conversation with Jesus asking the people what they'll do, and the people say that guy will kill them. And here Jesus is just saying that himself, and the people are saying, no, that can't happen. Because what he's saying is that the kingdom is going to be taken from you and given to the outsiders. Not just the unclean, the tax collectors and the prostitutes, and not just the sinners among you, but the outsiders, the goyim, the Gentiles. You're not going to have the vineyard anymore. But that goes back to what they said in Luke 4, when he was first ministering in Nazareth, and talking about how the people who are going to be helped are going to be those who are outside the chosen people. They did not want to hear that. It's the same concept. You remember, Luke was not a Jew, probably. And he probably wasn't writing to a Jew. The guy who wrote this and the guy he's writing to probably were both not Jews. So this emphasis on Gentiles is very significant. Jesus looked directly at them and asked, then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Everyone who falls on that stone, that's from Psalm 118. We've read that before. I'm not going to read it again now because we've read it before the other Gospels. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and on whom it falls will be crushed. And as I said before, I think it could refer to two different kinds of stones. Either the cornerstone that serves as the basis for the foundation of the building, and everything on the building is put in place based on that cornerstone, or the capstone of an arch which holds the arch together. Either way, it's the most important stone in the structure, because it's holding the rest of the building together and giving it its shape. And if you fall on the stone, if it's a cornerstone on the ground, it's a stumbling block. You trip over it and shatter to pieces. And sometimes, or if it's a capstone, it'll fall on you and crush you. If you reject it, that's what's going to happen. The stone the builders rejected, okay? It doesn't have to do that. You don't have to trip over it and fall and break to pieces. It doesn't have to fall on your head and crush you. But if you reject it, that's what's going to happen. The teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately, because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the people. Keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be honest. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he might say, so they could hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So they want him to say something that will give them a reason to hand him over to Pilate, so that Pilate can put him to death. So the spies questioned him. "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." So they're buttering him up. Anytime someone comes to you and starts talking to you like this, you got to be suspicious that they're buttering you up. And that's what they're doing to Jesus here. So the question is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? He saw through their duplicity and said to them, "Show me a denarius," and they give him one. "Whose portrait and inscription are on this?" "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Then give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's." They were unable to trap him in what he had said to them in public. And astonished by his answer, they became silent. They wanted him to say either one of two things. Either that they should pay taxes to Caesar, and that will disappoint him with the people, that will discredit him in their sight and make him lose status in the sight of the people around him, or say, "You should not pay taxes to Caesar," in which case he'd be a revolutionary, and they'd be fully justified in turning him over to Pilate and saying, "This guy is promoting rebellion, kill him, get rid of him." But he didn't do either of those things. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. And this was the Sadducees' trait. This was something that they did. They like to pose these sorts of logic puzzles and logic problems to confuse and defeat their enemies in logic arguments. This is a very common debating style that we still see engaged upon to this day. And it's a fine debating style if you can come up with a question that your opponents legitimately can't answer. I do this too sometimes. There are times when you're going to take someone's thought process, which you believe is incorrect or illogical. Well, to get them to see that, you just give them an example of their thought process taken to the extreme, and then see what they think about it. That's what they're doing here. They would have done this with the Pharisees, mostly. The Sadducees and the Pharisees didn't necessarily get along. They're basically like two different political parties vying for control in the nation. The Sadducees were the priestly class, so they had more governmental authority and power. The Pharisees were more of a lay person's group, and they were a pressure group, an activist group, that for the most part lacked actual political power, but they had more numbers, they were more numerous. So they would have butted heads a lot over there. They agreed with each other how much they hated Jesus, and later on with how much they hated Paul, and Paul actually exploited their disagreements with each other to his advantage, as we'll read about near the end of Acts in one of his many trials. So they agree with each other on some things, namely their hatred of Jesus, but they disagree with each other on many other things. And they were not allied and on everything. They were opposing political parties in many ways. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother, so that his name will not die out." That's the concept of levirate marriage. This is a very common concept in the ancient world. They, of course, come from Moses. They derive their teaching from the law of Moses, but this would have been a very common custom throughout the ancient world. Now, there were 7 which you marry your brother's widow, and the first son you have by her, child, I guess, in general, is credited to your brother, even though it's yours. Literally, your DNA, half of your DNA is in this child. It's credited to your brother so that his name will not die out. Also in a way to take care of the woman, if she's widowed now. Now she has a son, hopefully, who can take care of her. But mainly so that your brother's name will not die out. Now there were 7 brothers. Here's our thought process. Here's our logic problem. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman, but he died childless. The second and the third also married her, the same woman. In the same way, all 7 died, leaving no children. They all married the same woman, and none of them had any children. And finally, the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married her? She can't have 7 husbands. A man could have 7 wives, a woman couldn't have 7 husbands. So which one is going to get her in the resurrection? They think they've got him. This is it. There's no argument. There's no answer to this problem. They probably had used this argument to defeat the Pharisees before. So now they're going to use it on Jesus. Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage." That's men and women. Men get married, women are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy at taking part in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, so that's when the kingdom's going to come. The inheritance they're talking about is going to be at the resurrection of the dead. Will neither marry in the age to come, in the resurrection, will neither marry nor be given in marriage. And they can no longer die, but they are like the angels. So they will no longer die, and they will no longer apparently procreate. Now this concept here they're talking about, this marriage custom that they're talking about here, is about procreation. It's not really about marriage itself. This entire example, this entire logic problem that they're posing to Jesus, has more to do with procreation, how to carry on your brother's name after his death, or how to provide for his widow and her distress, being a widow. That has more to do with procreation, producing an heir and keeping the family line going. It's really not so much a marriage question. We think of it as a marriage question, but it's really more of an inheritance question, like who is going to keep the family line going. In the age to come, there will be no death, so there will be no need for that. We won't need to procreate in order to carry on our family line, or to carry on our name, or to provide for our distressed widows and mothers who have no support any longer. That won't need to happen anymore because there will be no more death. So we won't be procreating either. They are God's children, since they are the children of the resurrection. I don't know if this means there will be like no marriage at all, or no concept of men and women getting together in union. I'm not sure if this passage rules that out entirely. I know it's often preached that way. I'm just not quite willing to say that we can deduce from this passage and the parallels in Matthew and Mark that there will be no further male-female engagement in heaven. I mean, if we're going to say that, I might as well go so far as to say that there will be no women in heaven. Because if we're all going to be like the angels, where there are no female angels. So if we're going to be really literal and saying this passage teaches that there will be no marriage at all, we should probably go all the way and say, well, this passage indirectly teaches there will be no gender at all. And maybe we could say that. I mean, maybe we could say that. Now, in order for that to happen, every woman up in heaven will have to be turned into a man, because there is no such thing as a female angel. There's not one such thing described anywhere in the Bible. So if we're all like the angels, then we're all going to be male or masculine in form. I don't think that's going to happen. So because of that, I think there will still be a male and female, and there may still be some kind of union between a male and a female. Because, Jesus also said in one of his other teachings on marriage, what God has joined together, let man not separate. So if God has joined them together, I'm not sure, and doesn't want man to separate what he's joined together, I'm not sure if he himself is going to do that either. So I'm not entirely willing to say this passage rules out the idea of some form of male-female union in the age to come altogether, but it does rule out the idea of procreation, especially as it relates to propagation of the family name or inheritance. That is not going to happen any longer. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the bush, Even now, remember, the Sadducees only accepted the writings of Moses as authoritative. So even the other Old Testament scriptures that existed at the time, which are the entire Old Testament, they didn't accept that as authoritative. So in order to refute them on their own terms, Jesus is going to have to draw out something from the works of Moses. And Moses didn't say much about the resurrection or the afterlife. We talked about that when we actually read the works of Moses. Probably he didn't, because they came from Egypt, and Egypt was obsessed with the afterlife, and probably Moses' lack of emphasis on the afterlife is a direct result of Egypt's overemphasis on the afterlife. I don't know. But at any rate, Moses doesn't talk about it much, but Jesus is going to find an example in the works of Moses that does refer to it, and he's going to use that as his clinching argument against the Sadducees. But in the account of the bush, even Moses showed the dead rise, because they'll accept the works of Moses. For he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, who would have all been dead at the time of Moses. When Moses meets God in the burning bush, Jacob would have already been dead for a couple of hundred years, and Isaac and Abraham even longer than that. But God still identified himself as their God, saying, I am the God of these dead men. Now, I was the God of these dead men, but I am still the God of these dead men. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. Now, that's an interesting detail that Luke includes, and Matthew and Mark do not. It helps explain this teaching a little bit more broadly. In God's view, Abraham, when he was speaking to Moses, he still saw Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as alive somewhere. They were no longer available to Moses to talk to, or speak with, or have any kind of communion or fellowship with. They've been dead for centuries on earth. But somewhere in God's providence, he still saw them as existing, still saw them as being alive. And they will be again someday in bodily form, as will everyone. Some of the teachers of the law responded, well said, teacher. Remember, some of them actually would agree with him on this, because some of them would have argued the same point with the Sadducees in the past, and probably had been defeated by this very argument in the past, most likely. And no one dared to ask him any more questions. So Jesus said to them, so he's going to ask them a question. How is it that they say the Christ, or the Messiah, is the son of David? David himself declares in the book of Psalms, this is Psalm 110. We've read this before in the other Gospels, so we're not going to read it now, but the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. David calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? How can he be both before David and after David? How can he be David's son, yet also David's Lord, and vice versa? The only way he can do that is if he's pre-existing. He somehow comes both before David and after David at the same time. The only one who can do that is God. While all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for a show they make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely. Now, Matthew has a lot more. Mark and Luke both have just this little bit of condemnation here at the same point. Matthew, of course, goes on with an entire chapter of it. I like Matthew's account better. Luke had that same information, he just put it in a different place. Sometimes you just got to tell your opponents why they suck. Sometimes you just got to do it. Even Jesus did it. Sometimes you just got to let it be known why they suck. As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on.